Thank you all for joining Darien Library this evening for Divorce. Now what? If you're starting the process, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. What are the steps you need to take? What professionals will best serve you in this process? Tonight, we'll learn about the common mistakes and misconceptions that parties have about divorce. Our panel of experts this evening include Lisa Williams, a certified divorce coach, Mo Siegel, a litigator and mediator, and Matt Chamberlain, a financial advisor. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that programs at Darien Library are made possible by the annual Friends of the Library campaign. We thank you for your support to make programs like this, as well as our collections, available to the community. And now I'm going to pass the mic over to Mo.
Yes.
And he's going to kick things off. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Maurice from Mo Siegel, and I'm happy to join my colleagues, Lisa Williams and Matt Chamberlain. Thanks so much to the folks at the Darien Library for putting this out. So Matt, Lisa, and I are going to tag team this presentation. I'm going to go first and talk about some of the legal considerations of filing for divorce in Connecticut. Matt's going to talk about some of the important financial decisions that folks going through divorce have to consider. And then Lisa, certified divorce coach, is going to close us out with questions about pitfalls of decision-making and some mistakes to avoid. We're happy to answer questions. Please do put questions in the chat or the Q&A. We'll try to address them if we can while we're going through the talk, or if not, we'll leave a little time at the end, and we'll give you all our contact information if you'd like to contact us, which we please invite you to do. I'm going to share my screen because we're going to have a PowerPoint. So the first one is mine. Just a little bit about myself. Just one thing that'll change that was said before. I'm an attorney. I have been for 30-something years. I don't do any litigation work. I work as a mediator and as what's called a review counsel for people mediating with others. I stopped doing traditional litigated divorce many years ago. I think it's not a good way to go through the divorce process. So I work as a neutral, helping couples in a neutral way, helping both of them go through the divorce process in a cost-effective, non-adversarial, very cooperative way. And I'll act as a lawyer for people mediating with others, known as a review counsel, which is suggested. So with that, let me advance my slide. Okay, my slide didn't want to advance. There we go. Okay. So again, I'm just going to talk about some of the objective criteria if you're getting divorced, no matter how you go through the process. The first is what issues need to be decided in a divorce. So if you're going to get divorced in Connecticut, there are four main areas. However you go through the process, whether it's the mediator or collaborative divorce or traditional litigated divorce or on your own, they're the same buckets of issues that have to be decided, and it really breaks down into four main areas of things. One, if you have minor children, custody and parenting issues about your children. How will you make decisions about your kids? Who will the children live with? How will you share time with them? So that's legal custody and physical custody concerns. Probably the most important things in a divorce case that you have to decide. Second are financial issues about your children. Well, Matt will go into a little bit more detail. What will the child support arrangements be? How will you pay for the children's extracurricular expenses? Who will cover the children's health insurance and uncovered medical expenses? How will you pay for any necessary child care? How will you cover college costs? That's the second bucket of issues. The third one are your assets and debts. What are your assets? Your houses, your retirement accounts, your stock portfolios, your personal belongings. What are they worth? How will those be divided? How will your debts be paid for? The fourth main issue is alimony, which is known as spousal support, often a payment from one spouse to another. Will there be any alimony in your case? If so, what are the terms of alimony? How much will it be? How long will it last for? How could it be changed in the future? And then there are some secondary issues. Are there tax implications to these decisions? Will one or both of you need to carry life insurance? This is the universe of things. On my website, there's a list here that shows you the issues that need to be decided. If you're interested, the list can be downloaded as a PDF from my website issues to be decided in a mediation. You're welcome to download it. This breaks down the list of, in a little bit more detail, of the things that I just mentioned. I use this as a checklist in every divorce case. And we go through it methodically until we come to decisions. So however you're going through the divorce, this is the universe of things that have to be decided. Now, if you're getting divorced, how can you go through the process? There are different ways. One, you can be what are called pro se parties, where one or both of the couples, of the individuals, represent themselves in the court case. A lot of people do it this way, not always the advantageous. It's always good to have good, solid representation. You can go through the divorce in the traditional process, where each party or one or both parties have an attorney, and the attorneys are doing the heavy lifting. They are requesting financial and other information. They are talking to each other. They're doing the negotiating. That's the traditional way of going through the divorce. It can be somewhat more adversarial and expensive often with that procedure. There's the process that I practice, primarily mediation, where the couple is using a neutral third party to help them resolve all of those issues, to come to hopefully the same decisions you would if you were doing it in a traditional approach, but you're doing it where the couple is talking to each other, sitting around a table or at a Zoom meeting, and coming to fair decisions on these questions. There's something called the collaborative approach, which I like to think about as a hybrid of mediation. Each party might sit at a table with their lawyers, but the lawyers have vowed, so to speak, to work collaboratively, talk to each other, and there might be other professionals involved in the collaborative approach: financial professionals, divorce coaches, mental health professionals, all trying to work in a cooperative way for folks to get divorced, or some combination of the above. What's just important to know is you're not tied into a particular process. If you're going to get divorced and you want to try mediation or the collaborative approach and see if it works, great. If it doesn't, and you need to bring in your lawyers to get more involved, you can. You're not locked into a particular method. So you have choices in how you want to, in how you can go through the divorce process. What professional advice will you need if you get divorced? Well, there could be any number of different professionals depending on your issues and the complexity of your case and your finances. You should have attorneys. And even if you use my services as a mediator, I recommend that each party get an attorney anyway to give them independent advice, like a second opinion. You might need a mediator. You could use financial professionals like Matt. You might want the service, one or both of you, of a divorce coach like Lisa. You might need to bring in other professionals, somebody to value a pension or to draft a certain court order to divide up a pension. You might, one or both people might want to bring in mental health professionals. You might want to bring in a parenting coordinator to help you make decisions about your children. You might have assets like retirement accounts, houses, or businesses that need somebody to appraise them so you can properly handle them in a divorce case. If in the unlikely, and hopefully it's something you can avoid scenario going to a trial, you might need to bring in an expert witness to testify at your trial about the earning capacity of someone, the value of a business. So the professional advice will vary depending on the number of things, including the complexity of your case. But there are lots of professionals that are there to help you. Lisa, Matt, and myself are part of a networking group of divorce professionals, people from a spectrum, the wide spectrum of professions, financial professionals, mediators, attorneys, CPAs, and who all touch people in divorce. So we all have a wide network of people if you're looking for a referral for someone. Okay, why don't my slides want to advance? There we go. The legal process. So if you're going to get divorced in Connecticut, no matter how you go through the process, divorce is a lawsuit. So somebody at some point in the process has to, quote unquote, sue the other person for divorce. I'm sorry it's set up as a lawsuit, which is sort of by nature adversarial, but that's the way the court system is set up. It doesn't matter who sues who for divorce. There's no real advantage or disadvantage for being the one who sues. First, if you're gonna get divorced in Connecticut, if you live in Darien or Fairfield, in Lower Fairfield County, your case will be in the Stamford Court. There's different what are called judicial districts. You have to live in Connecticut for at least a year before either starting or finishing the divorce action for the court to have the jurisdiction or power to divorce you. There are other ways you can get divorced in Connecticut. If you lived in Connecticut at the time of the marriage and returned here, the cause of the dissolution arose after moving to Connecticut. For most folks, if you've been here a year, the court can divorce you. In some cases, you can get divorced in 2 states. Let's say one person lives in New York and one person lives in Connecticut. You then have to decide maybe strategically, where is it best to file for divorce? Okay. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to advance my slides. They don't want to advance. There we go. There are papers that are part of the initial divorce process, something called the summons and complaint, where you have to list, among other things, the grounds for divorce, the reason. Connecticut's a no-fault divorce state, where you can simply say the marriage broke down. Regardless of why it broke down, if there was fault or not, most folks simply say the marriage irretrievably broke down. Papers are supposed to be served by a marshal or an indifferent person on the defendant, but you can waive the need to be served, as all of my clients do. You fill out a form saying, I don't need a marshal to come to my house or place of work, just hand the papers to me. There, I'm going to skip just to the bottom point. A lis pendens is something used sometimes in a divorce case where there's real property, where you might put was a lien or a notice on the land records saying that there's a divorce case which could affect ownership of this house. It stops the other party from selling the house out without putting the world on notice. So it's something you can use in a divorce case. People often ask me about, well, should we get legally separated or divorced? Or they come to me and say, I want to be legally separated. You don't see a lot of legal separation. You sometimes see informal separations where one person moves out because it makes things easier for the family, and that's fine and common. A legal separation is a lawsuit. Like a divorce, you have to go through the whole same process of a divorce, but the judge at the end bangs down the gavel and says separated, not divorced. And then there's an additional step of having to convert that separation in the future to a divorce. The main reason you ever see legal separation is sometimes for health insurance. If spouses want to stay on a health policy, because you can't stay on the same policy together if you are divorced, unless you pay a large amount under federal law. Sometimes you can stay on a policy if you're legally separated. Most health insurers won't even allow you to do that. So you don't see a lot of what's called legal separation. You sometimes see informal separation. Attached to every set of divorce papers, again, whether it's mediation or not, are what are called automatic orders. And these are important to know. When a divorce starts, the court imposes orders on both people, which essentially say, keep the status quo. Don't do the things that get people riled up in divorce cases. So they say, once a divorce starts, you can't kick somebody out of a house without a court order if you're living together, transfer assets out of your name, change beneficiaries on insurance policies, withdraw, sums of money, put liens on property. These actions tend to get people riled up in divorce cases. So I always tell my clients, to the extent that you can, keep the status quo. Keep paying bills where you've been paying them. Don't transfer money to your cousin in Ohio because you're trying to hide it. Once these orders are in place, if somebody does those things, you can be held in contempt of court. So a legal consideration would be, when do I start the legal process? If you're concerned that your spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse might do some of these things, you might want to get these orders in place so you start the legal action sooner rather than later. I don't mean to rush through this, but I want to make sure I'm leaving enough time for Matt and Lisa. Connecticut has what's called a cooling off period. When you start a legal divorce, there's a 90-day cooling off period before you can actually get divorced. You can waive that 90 days, just like you can waive the need for a marshal to hand you papers. You can waive the need to wait the 90-day period. If you have minor children in Connecticut in a divorce, you must take a parenting education course. It's a 6-hour course. It costs $150. It's offered at various social service agencies all over the state. And it talks about how you deal with children in the context of divorce. Activities during the court case, it's really changed during COVID. It's hard to access the court now. And in fact, you can get divorced if you do it collaboratively or through mediation without ever stepping foot in the courtroom. It used to be that you had to at least go to court for the judge to bang down the gavel and approve your agreement and say divorce. Now you just submit papers. You can still file motions during the pendency of your divorce case. They're called pendente lite motions, for temporary orders, temporary child support, temporary alimony, temporary custody. It's harder to get those motions acted on now by a court because it's harder to access a judge, but you have the right to do that. The court has various ways of intervening in your case to try to get you to settle. Court conferences, status conferences, it's now all done by Zoom or Microsoft Teams, but the court wants you to settle. Most divorce cases, most people, like most other litigations, settle. It's in the rare case, but it happens. If you can't settle, you have a trial. And the trial is before a judge. You don't have a jury trial in a divorce case in Connecticut. A judge decides your issues. What I would say is you want to avoid that. One, it's terribly expensive to go through that process. And two, you don't want to put in these important decisions that affect you and your family in the hands of a judge. You want control over those. That's what mediation and collaboration and trying to come to an agreed upon, agreement does. You want the control over that, and I urge you to try to resolve those issues in some collaborative fashion. What are the costs of a divorce case? It's a very big fat it depends. What method you're using. Are you using very expensive lawyers? Are you using the traditional approach? There are court costs. There's a $360 court filing fee. Everybody has to pay. You pay the $150 for the parenting course. Then you might have to pay your attorney, your mediator, various expert witnesses. If you're having a custody battle over your children, the court is going to maybe appoint a guardian ad litem, that's the GAL, or an attorney for your children. You have to pay those. You might have to pay therapists, a divorce coach, a financial professional. I've seen, so the costs of divorce range from, could be nothing for doing it yourself, to a couple $1,000s to tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars if people are contentious. So one of the nice things, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt, of trying to do it in the mediation or collaborative approach, is it saves you a lot of money. You're paying, if it's a mediator, like my services, you're paying one professional primarily to help you, not two lawyers talking to each other. You can really control what those costs are. Here's my contact information. I'm going to now turn it over to Matt, who's going to delve a little bit deeper into some of the important financial decisions in a divorce case. Matt, it's to you.
Mo, before you go, I just ask, if someone's asked, can a judge reject an uncontested divorce agreement agreed to by both parties where both parties have legal representation?
The answer is yes, a judge can. The judge has to approve an agreement. So even if you have an agreement, I think in my almost 30 years of practice, I've never had an agreement rejected by a judge. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but if a judge, if you go through a process with a professional and you have it reviewed by lawyers, unless the judge thinks something is so off base, you can make any decision you want. What I've seen happen, at least in the case with mine, is somebody was waiving the right to alimony where they really would have gotten alimony. And we had a long discussion about that. And the judge didn't like that fact that they were waiving the right to get alimony. So he said to the parties, I want to amend your agreement to have you get at least what's called $1 a year of alimony, the right to come back in the future. And the parties said yes. So the answer is yes, they can. But if you have legal representation and you've gone through a thorough process, you have the right to decide whatever you want.
Okay, and one last question. What if your spouse takes advantage of your accounts during the divorce process? How do you protect yourself?
Well, you have these automatic orders. So if somebody is diluting assets or transferring assets out of your name, you might have to go chasing after that money or do an analysis of seeing where that money went. So ultimately, it should come back to sort of bite them in the tail. But that's why you might want, if you're worried about that, have these automatic orders and start a divorce action, have the court impose these orders which would punish people for doing something like that. Matt,
thanks, Mo.
Yep. Wonderful. Mo, thank you for your fast pace. You're very generous and putting up with my technology challenges. So wonderful to see you all tonight online, even though I can see, but you can't see me. And one of the things that I want to encourage everybody to recognize is that tonight is about to hear the story of what the process is. Mo covered a lot of details. I'll cover a lot of details. Lisa will explain her process in depth. One of the things that when I think about this process of divorce is, and Mo said this, and I'm quoting him, it's very much a business decision. We don't want to litigate the emotional upset that is for real. It's genuine. Somebody feels strongly this way, somebody feels strongly that way. It's a real process. Our hearts go out to that, but as professionals, we're going to kind of try to keep people corralled on the process of, if the divorce has to happen, we're going to try to do it in the most cost-effective way, efficient way, and hopefully limit the fallout. One of the things that we care about, and one of the things I love working with these two colleagues, is that we want the fallout to be as minimized as possible, so that for the family, if there are children involved, we want it to be as minimal as possible. There's no value in the professionals exacerbating situation, and sometimes that does happen. So I encourage anyone who's on the call, whether they're on for themselves or for a friend, just be mindful that selecting the right professionals really matters. It's true with your doctor, with whomever. It's true in this process as well. And as you go into this process, if you're not aware of it firsthand already, the information, again, we can walk you through. And if you want to have a quick call with anybody afterwards, we're available. For me tonight, I just want to really kind of think from a planning point of view. This first slide just shows simply prepare yourself. You want to be informed. You want to gather information. You want to gather documents. You want to gather everything you can. And it may not be easy. You may not be familiar with insurance policies. You may not be familiar with the banking accounts. Where are the investment accounts? That's okay. Let's respect that you're starting at the beginning, wherever you were. If tonight you're halfway through it, if tonight you're here for a friend, wherever you are is okay. So we start where you are right now. We want to talk about where we're going to go. We're going to plan where you're going to go. Someone like Lisa or Mo or myself, we're going to be mindful of, we know we want to get this done, and then what's the world going to look like for you afterwards? And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the process. That's where we come in. That's our space. We're very familiar with it. I'll share personal information that all three of us have been through it personally. So we know it professionally, we know it personally. So we're very sensitive to what everybody's going through. Karen, if you would, next slide. So in divorce, one of the things I learned the hard way, but that we all know, and Mo certainly has done a good job explaining, there's three basic tenets or pillars of divorce. There's going to be the asset division. What do we have? There's going to be, if appropriate, spousal support. What is that going to look like? And is there going to be child support necessary? And number three is the parenting plan. If there are minor children involved, there's going to be a parenting plan. So if you get nothing else out of tonight, just get in your mind, we're going to split up what we got. We're going to figure out whether there's going to be support for the non-breadwinner, the primary caregiver at home, and if there are children involved. And if there are minor children, how are we going to parent them? So it's important to work out all those details. We're mindful of a 3,000 level or 30,000 foot level, and we're mindful of a ground level. We're mindful of that all the time. Karen, next slide, please. So when it comes to asset division, think of it simply as, what do we have and what do we owe? If we have a house that has equity in, okay, well, we have a house and we owe the owe on the mortgage. And that's true for everything else. If you haven't done a financial affidavit, or if you're considering doing a divorce, you will get familiar with a financial affidavit. And that's simply a shopping list of what you have, what you owe, and then it'll get into the income and expenses as well. So just be mindful of, if you're business minded, this is your balance sheet. And if you're most like most normal people, what do we have and what do we owe? Next slide, please. So one of the things that's going to be really useful before, during, or after is really being mindful of your budget. When you think about, where does the income come from? Is it a W-2 job? Is it a small business? Is it some other rental property investments maybe? So there's a number of different ways that a family will have survived as a unit with their income, and then being very mindful of the spending. One of the things that I've said to clients in my financial planning practice is we often don't have as much control over our income, but we do have a lot of control over our spending. So we're going to kind of be stuck with the necessities. We all are. We need food, clothing, and housing, but there's going to be a lot of other spending that's discretionary. And over time, one thing to be mindful of is, if there's one house and one family, and now there's going to be two households, and the family's going to be split up. And if there's children involved, the children are going to go back and forth if they're minor children, the cost of living is going up. So let us be mindful that when a divorce happens, the standard of living typically goes down for both parties. And then there are all the other variables that we can go through. You see them on the screen, but when you go through the financial aspects of divorce, you will be mindful of these, you'll review these. And quite honestly, if you're not familiar with them previously, the beauty of it, crazy as that may sound, is you're going to get to know them and you're going to get control of them if you haven't had control already. Next slide, please. And the question is, and Mo has guided, but what is there going to be spousal support? And it's going to be based on a number of factors. How long was the marriage? What was the income? What's the earning capacity of both parties? Is there going to be child support? Is there special needs involved for the kids? And it will this process of deciding what the appropriate spousal support will be will take into consideration standard of living, physical health, self-sufficiency. How long was the marriage? On and on. So there are a number of factors that go into it, and good legal guidance will be able to help guide on that, and financial and coaching will help in other ways kind of bring together an understanding of what's an appropriate amount. We don't want to be way askew on reality. If the income of a household is 100,000, the spousal support can't be 100,000. The math doesn't work. So you figure that out based on what your options are. Next slide, please. So when it comes to cost of parenting, sometimes we have kids and we just spend money as needs. Depending on our budget and our ability to save money, do we have enough to cover our needs? This is a list of the cost of parenting children. In a divorce, child support is very important. Will we educate our kids publicly, privately? And things will change, and some hard choices will be made. What kind of extracurricular activities do we have before? Do we spend the whole summer at camp? Do we spend 1 or 2 weeks? Well, how can we get around some of the costs that we can let go of? But obviously a necessity like healthcare, we can't get around that. Vacations, we can scale them up and scale down based on our income. So let us, when it comes to cost of parenting the children, let us have some flexibility as we kind of recognize that the cost of living is rising, and we're going to have to get by probably, unless, at least for now, until maybe both parents will be able to be working. So it's a process of discerning what the cost of living is and figuring out how to survive. Next slide, please. So these questions we don't need to go through individually here. You can get the slides to go through, but these are the questions like that you'll go through with your your coach and your attorney. You'll go through what's the cost to live? How much do I need in the future? How can I lower my cost of living? And all these questions you'll cover incrementally through the process of working with your team. And you'll come to understand what they are, but we don't need to address them right now just for the sake of time. Next slide, please. When it comes to marital property versus individual property, this is Mo's space, and he'll help explain this further. But basically, marital property is the property that you accumulate while you're married. Individual property is the property that you come into the marriage with, or it's been solely given to you, inheritance, etc., and it's kept separate during the marriage. But again, Mo would be able to be the resource for that more. Karen, next slide, please. When it comes to the house, this is all a part of the financial decision. How much, or financial decisions with an S, how much do we make? How much do we spend? Can we afford to keep the house? And that's an analysis. We're not going to do that tonight, but it's an analysis of what's reality. Sometimes the hope is to keep the continuity of the family house if one spouse leaves. And is that affordable? And we'll have to do, crunch the numbers to see if that works. Next slide, please. Again, we'll crunch the numbers and we'll see based on the income and the fixed expenses whether it's affordable to stay. Next slide, please. Renting is an option, and it's a very viable option. It may not feel like it is right now in this current real estate environment, and that's fair. That's fair, but there are options, and we don't want to feel limited in the process. If this has to happen, and if the choice is to do so, we'll figure out how to make it work. Next slide, please. This is a long list. It appears right now, yes. But what you'll get into in the process with the three of us, or professionals like us, is you'll figure these out. You'll figure out what the child support is and what are the state mandates and what's the schedule look like. What are the education costs and what are our flexibility? How can we, finance this education? And health coverage, that'll be an issue for the courts. The courts will actually be very mindful of that and make sure that the legal representation has gotten you there. And if there's a refusal by one party to acknowledge that and support that, the courts will make sure it happens. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So gather your information. This list we don't need to go through right now, but you'll get in the PowerPoint. You're going to want to gather your information. You're going to want to go over it with your professional team. And as you do that, if you're not familiar with it already, you'll learn. We as professionals are often, kind of coaching and teaching clients of what it is, what is an IRA? What is a 401k? Some of these things have happened naturally because of employment. There might be a 401k from the spouse that's the primary caregiver that's been lingering for years that has not been paid attention to. Well, what does that look like? How does that figure in? We definitely get into that when we do the financial analysis of the family and what's going to happen in divorce. Next slide, please. And again, encouragement. You don't need to do this alone, and you want to really be selective in who you choose to work with, because I think it's obvious, adults that are facing divorce, you've been through enough in life to know that it makes a difference. You find somebody who cuts your hair well, you trust them. You want to make sure that you like your attorney, you like your accountant, hopefully, and if not, you got to find another one. But your divorce coach and your financial advisor. Next slide, please. Credit, we can get into that another time, but credit, what do you know about your credit? Do you know where it stands? If you haven't established it before, how do you establish it now? And we can definitely get into that further at another time. Next slide, please. So let's skip that, but we'll skip that. We'll talk about credit if you have further questions, even in a call later on, if you want. Next slide, please. Retirement and healthcare are natural, and retirement and health and long-term planning are a natural process after divorce. When you're in the divorce, I think again of those three pillars. There's the division of what we have. Is there support coming, and what to do with the children if they're minor children, and what's the child support look like? When we think about retirement, we look at after the divorce is done. There's a lot of planning that goes on after the divorce, and that's really important, but we don't really focus on your future planning until the divorce is done because it's premature, and it's very necessary shortly thereafter. Next slide, please. Estate planning is huge, but again, that would be, if you've already done estate planning and you've got trust that exists right now, that's something that Mo would deal with and help you work through. You might bring in a trusted estate attorney if necessary. If there's trusts that have been in the family that have been paying into your family, let's say grandparents, great-grandparents, et cetera, that it's all definitely a process, part of the process of including all the assets, all the income, and how that money has either been kept separate or not. Next slide, please. So again, where you are right now, think about that for a moment, and that's okay. If you don't know something, we're here to help. Ultimately, where do you want to go? You want to be divorced, and then you want to have a future. And that's what we're as a team, we're a part of supporting a person going through divorce for number three, how you get there. And where you're strong and great. Where you don't, we help out, we support. Next slide, please. And my information is going to be available on the last slide. And Lisa, if I may, again, Karen and the rest of the Darien Library, thank you for getting me through with the technology challenges. Lisa, please.
Okay.
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Williams. I'm a divorce coach. I have my MBA, and I specialize in helping special needs families get divorced. Knowing that every family is different, but for special needs families, there are some things that can and should be thought about when putting a divorce agreement together. If you don't know what divorce coaching is, it's a relatively new type of coaching. The American Bar Association defines it as a flexible, goal-oriented process designed to support, motivate, and guide people through divorce to help them make the best possible decisions for their future based on their particular interests, needs, and concerns. Mo and Matt have outlined some of the nuts and bolts of how you get divorced and what data elements, some facts that you need to research and get down pat in order to get divorced. But what you do with those facts and figures is something that I can talk about, because I talk about with my clients, what are the possibilities, what are your needs and concerns, and how, as you as an individual with your kids, what are you looking for? Because as Mo said, part of this is a negotiation. So you want to make sure that the things that are very important to you are brought up and negotiated as best you can, and understand what things are not important to you. I liken my practice to a nurse navigator position. I don't know if any of you know that the cancer centers, a lot of the cancer hospitals have added this position, and it's called a nurse navigator. And they are the person, the day you get diagnosed, you get assigned a nurse navigator, and they literally coach you and guide you through the entire cancer process, all the way into the end, when hopefully you get a clean bill of health, you ring the bell in the chemo ward, and you go on your merry way. Because the hospitals realized that there was a position that was missing, and patients were feeling like they were falling through the cracks because they had multiple professionals helping them. And they had, this way they had one point of contact. If they had any question, any concerns, they can go to that one person and they can guide them to the answer. And that's how I guide my practice. I'm going to talk about some of the pitfalls of decision making, and a lot of this has to do with the emotions of divorce. We talked about divorce being more of a business. It can be hard to get from the emotional part of it to the business end. So I'm going to talk about the pitfalls of decision making. The first one is considering too few options. For example, someone says, I absolutely have to keep the house. Well, there are a lot of things you can do with the house that people don't even realize. They don't have to sell the house today. Maybe the kids are in junior high and the couple agrees the children stay in the house until they graduate from high school, and then the house is sold. So some of these decisions can be sliced and diced different ways. And my mantra always is, what's in the best interest of the children? And if we can brainstorm ideas that work for everyone, keeping the best interests of the children at heart, then that's a win for everybody. Another one is only looking for evidence to support your ideas. A lot of this happens when you're talking with family and friends, and they say, in my divorce, I got this, you're not going to get that. You really be open to different opportunities to get this done, and also rely on the facts and figures, because out of the facts and figures, some of the decisions can fall out. Like Matt was saying, depending on what the income is, that might not be able to be changed, but some of the expense side items can be. The other one is, another pitfall is short-term emotion tempts you to make a decision that you will pay for later. Try not to make decisions in the heat of the moment. Really, the time to make a decision is being cool, calm, and collected, even if you have to put that decision down for a little bit and deal with it when you're calm. Because a lot of times when decisions are made in the heat of the moment, not all the attributes of that decision are understood. Another pitfall is being overconfident about how the future will unfold. And that really talks to Matt's job as well, is to look at the future and make sure that the decisions that you're making today how will they affect you going in the future? Will there be enough money for the kids for college? Will I need to sell my house? Where do I want to live long term? And if you're overconfident You may be giving up some things that you shouldn't give up. Going back to the example that Mo gave, where the person was saying, I don't need alimony. And the judge was like, that's not, I'm not totally agreeing with that. So we put the dollar placeholder in there so the person can come back later on if their financial position changed. The other mistake is throwing in the towel, and we all get worn down. You know, this is a test of patience getting a divorce, but throwing in the towel too soon just because you want it done means that later on you might be dealing with the ramifications. And once you sign on that dotted line, it's very hard to go back to court and get something modified. You have to hire a lawyer. It takes time, and the court doesn't look kindly on that. Oh, this is one that, especially when people feel like they're out of control and they don't have control over the process, where they think it's my way or the highway approach. The consequences are increased legal costs, negative court surprises, and angrily bypass a good settlement. If someone digs in the heels and said, I'm not giving on any part of this negotiation, the divorce process can go on longer than it really needs to. Allowing others to make your decisions. And a lot of this comes from having family, and well-meaning family, by the way, giving their opinion. But every divorce, while the process is the same, the details can be different. Your financial landscape, what the needs of your children, the personalities of your children, you really need to understand what's best for you and your family. And wanting guarantees and certainties. Unfortunately, in this process, there were no guarantees and certainty. There is a process that will give everybody comfort and should take some of the stress out of it. But there are no guarantees. So again, like Mo said, very few divorces end up going before a judge. So that whole thing of, I'm going to go before a judge because I am certain that judge is going to give me X, Y, and Z, can backfire. And another mistake is not getting enough information from qualified resources. Of course, we're showing all the different pieces of the puzzle that the three of us help out with. And the reason why this is so important is because you're only going through this once. You're not going back. So do it right the first time with the professionals that you need. And again, going back to a hospital analogy, if you go in for open heart surgery, your surgeon is Mo, the attorney, is the main person that will get you across the finish line. But that surgeon is not in the operating room alone. The surgeon's there with the anesthesiologist, with the instrument nurse, with somebody who makes sure that the room is sterilized. And all those people work together with the surgeon to do your heart surgery. So the same thing happens in divorce. The professionals that you may need or want are going to make the process easier and less stressful. And also, when at the end of the day, when you sign on the dotted line, there's no regrets. You've done everything you could to get the process done with the least amount of stress for the best possible outcome for you. And that is all I have.
Well, this has been an incredible amount of information from all three of you. And we do have a couple of questions. Here's one. Is there a disadvantage to simply physically separating, dividing assets, and filing for divorce years later?
You can do that. I think the question would be is, unless you have something in writing saying this is how the assets are going to be divided permanently, you can decide, informally to divide up assets and 5 years later file for divorce, and your soon to be ex said, well, no, I changed my mind. I want something else. So unless you have either a prenuptial or in this case, maybe a postnuptial agreement, which is like a prenup that you do, once you're married. I think there's no guarantee that that's what the division of assets will be. The other issue could be this. Alimony, for example, in division of assets is based in part, there are no formulas for those two things. They're based in part on a variety of factors, including how long you were married. So alimony, there's rules of thumb, even though there's no formula. The longer you're married, perhaps if there's alimony, the longer it might be. A rough rule of thumb, and don't say this is, be all and end all, half the length of the marriage for alimony. So if you were married if you only lived together for 10 years and you separated, but then you didn't get divorced for 5 years later, so it's a 15-year marriage, there could be 15, it could be alimony based on 15 years, not 10 years. So.
Okay. Our next question is, who makes state divorce law?
It is a state-based thing. So Connecticut has divorce laws, and divorce laws differ from state to state. For example, I'll give you one example. In Connecticut, there is no concept of separate assets in a divorce. When you divide up your assets, it's the law is known as equitable distribution. There's actually a law, a statute in Connecticut, which sets up the equitable distribution factors. So every asset in Connecticut divorce that you have gets laid out on a table. It doesn't mean they all get divided, but you look at each asset then to decide equitably or fairly how they get divided up. In New York, there are certain assets which are automatically separate, which wouldn't even get put into the pot. Now, if you have a nuptial agreement, they might be separate. So if you can get divorced in two different states, you might want to think strategically which state might be better for you than
have any of you noticed, so this is for all three of you, what is the most common year, or if there is a common year of marriage ending in divorce?
If the question means, how many years have somebody been married before they get divorced?
Yes.
I don't see a common. I would say maybe generally it's between 10 and 20 years, but I've seen divorces after 2 years, and I've seen divorces after 35 years. So from my experience, it's all over the board. Matt,
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah, I mean, you could statistically, you could come up with a bell curve and say, hey, where is it? Is it year 7? Is it year 10? But Mo, you've seen them all. I've seen a number. I haven't seen that many what are called gray, where they're like in their 60s and 70s, which is a bigger trend now. And COVID has changed things, from what I understand. Divorce from 2019 to 2020 into now is up 65%, and we can guess why. So certainly the statistics are being skewed by the suffering that's going on.
And I would say when you talk about a gray divorce, that raises some of its own issues. When if people are married 30-something years, but then a person's going to pay alimony, but they're getting closer to retirement age. Well, how does alimony continue, for example, or spousal support if they're not working? So it raises its own issues.
And someone also asked a question that Matt just answered. With the pandemic, have you seen an uptick in divorces over the past year?
More than an uptick, sadly.
I'll say.
However, it has been harder, as I said before during my talk, to access the court system. So a lot of divorce cases bogged down. So cases that should have settled or gone to trial are stuck in the court sort of vortex, and they're not moving. Yet another reason to try to take the decisions in your own hands. Use a mediator, use a collaborative approach, so you're not relying on the court. I've had clients that have been very frustrated where their spouses won't engage in the process, and they can't move their divorce forward because it's harder to get the court's attention. Perhaps that'll change now that things are loosening up, but it's definitely been a challenge.
One thing I know Mo can speak to is there's a tremendous amount of case law. There's history to divorce in Connecticut and all states, but there's a kind of a rules of the road based on, or an expectation based on what's going on over the last 30, 40 years. and Mo knows this far better than I do, but like we know what case law is. I've read any number of cases, judges' decisions, etc. But the case law, that's the history of divorce. That's where, where if Mo, I'm saying if, forgive me, I don't want to speak for you, but if somebody says, well, what can I expect in divorce? Well, 50% roughly. And then if support is appropriate. So just so you know, this is not a willy-nilly wet finger in the wind. What direction is the wind blowing today? There is a tried and true statistical realm of what's real, what's reasonable, what's normal, what you should expect. And then you work from there depending on your personal situation.
Is Connecticut considered a good state to get divorced in?
I'm not quite sure, how to answer that. I don't know if the rules are going to vary much, but for example, in New York, alimony is more formulaic. So one might get more alimony in Connecticut than they might in another state. But you might be constrained about where you can get divorced. If you're both living in Connecticut, Connecticut might be the only state that has the power to divorce you.
Right. Well, you know how people always say, oh, you never want to get a divorce in California.
Yeah.
Because it's straight right down the middle, I guess.
Well, and Connecticut is not what's called a community property state. And I think Matt said this. If you're married, there are rules of thumb. If you're married 30-something years, it's very likely assets are going to be divided 50-50. I can't say that, for certainty, but, very likely. If you're married 3 years, probably not.
Right.
Here's just something to know. No matter what method you choose to go through the divorce process, mediation, collaborative, the result should be essentially the same. The results shouldn't change based on the method you use. Your results on alimony.
That's a good point.
Will be based on your set of facts, how long you're married, your incomes, your education, why the marriage broke down, and most judges don't really care. What you each contribute to acquiring an asset. Those are the things that should decide your decisions, not the fact that you're choosing mediation over collaborative over something else.
And one thing, if I can encourage people to be mindful of, if you're in a complicated situation, there are ways to creatively solve for that. So don't think just because there's an area of your financial world where I'm not familiar with private equity, or I'm not familiar with that rental property, or I'm not familiar with. There are ways to objectively value things. There are ways to objectively and fairly divide up things, and we have to be very careful of that. If we're the party that is less familiar with that, we need to make sure that we get good advice, because you could lose out on an opportunity if the other party is a little more savvy in a certain area. So it's important to definitely get good guidance on some of the more complicated situations.
Very good advice.
I'll touch on. I just want to touch on one thing that Lisa said, Pliff. It's so important, and I say it's don't listen to the Greek chorus. You're going to get advice from your family members and friends, but they don't know your situation. Just like Lisa said, your situation is unique to you. So you can hear from these people, but get good professional advice to help you make sound decisions.
I just wanted to bring up one thing that relates to what Matt was saying about those numbers that we have to provide. Sometimes it's scary if one person is in charge of all the finances and the other one isn't. Well, everybody in Connecticut has to fill out what's called a financial affidavit. And so the wife fills out one and the husband fills out one. And that's everything about your financial life, your income, expenses, assets, and liabilities, down to the cost of flowers for your house for the week, if that is what happens in your household. So it's a legal document. So I meet people where, say, the wife is nervous about asking the husband for these numbers. Well, he has to supply them. It's part of the divorce process. So some of these processes, I believe, will put in place to take some of the stress out of it. So the wife fills out her affidavit, the husband fills out his, and they sign it at the bottom like they're signing their tax returns. It's a legal document.
If I could just add one more thing, when it comes to my personal experience and professional experience, having someone, and Lisa, this is a little plug for you, but for all you listeners, the reason I'm doing this is you might look at this last slide that we have up there and say, well, I think I just need one person. Maybe I just need the attorney. That may very well be true, and if it's true for you guys, fantastic. But if you have a little bit of a complicated situation, or if you have an emotional, a rather tumultuous situation in the emotional side of it, of the divorce, you're going to want to have a coach. So one of the things I wish I had back in the day when I went through mine 8 years ago, I wish we had a coach, someone that would kind of steer clear of the cliff or the jagged rocks or whatever, because we really want to make this process as efficient as possible, lower the cost of the process. I mean, there's enough people getting divorced that we're very busy. So it's not like we want to gouge someone from our side. From your side, our hearts go out to it. We've been through it. So you can have this process. You can get to the other side. Pick the right team, but you can get to the other side with as minimal damage as possible. But be mindful of that, and if you can separate, if you're emotionally upset right now, separate the emotions from just getting the task accomplished. This is just an encouragement.
Well, this has been wonderful. Mo, Matt, Lisa, thank you so much. One of our attendees said you've made this process a little less frightening, and I think that's really true.
That's our goal.
Well, you've achieved it. Thank you all so much. And I hope everyone will take your contact information, but we will be sending out the slides to all the attendees.
If we
Thank you very much.
Anybody, please let us know. If you just have a question on something that we brought up or afterwards, please feel free to reach out to any one of us.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thank you all. Lovely to meet you.
Oh.